Good afternoon, Chamber members. For those of you I haven't met yet, I'm Sabrina Binkley, Head of School at Spruce Tree Montessori and Board Chair for the Greater Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to take a moment, as we do each week, to thank our executive partners whose logos you saw on the screen before we began today. These businesses are really the backbone of business in our community and have been a pillar of strength for the Fairbanks Chamber. A full list of our executive partners can be found on our website. I would also like to let you know that the Chamber is accepting applications for our 2021 advocacy committees through October 30th. Our 5 advocacy committees advise the Chamber on issues that may impact our members. They meet regularly to learn about issues affecting our region, provide input on advocacy actions like the political forums that we're hosting today, and determine our advocacy program of work for the coming year. Any employee of a Chamber member organization may apply to join the advocacy committees. Please check out fairbankschamber.org/committees for more information. Now to today's program. Welcome to the Fairbanks Chamber's Political Forum for candidates running for Alaska House Seat 4 and Senate Seat B. Today's forum will last up to 90 minutes, and if you can't stay online until 1:30 today, or you missed any of our previous forums, recordings of all 2020 Fairbanks forums can be found at fairbankschamber.org. The Greater Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce is a nonpartisan organization which advocates for the conditions that will allow businesses of all sizes to prosper in our region. We are focused on the betterment of our members by working with all levels of local, state, and federal government officials. Our goal for our political forums is to help you in the audience understand your choices during this fall's election cycle. The candidates here today will appear on the ballot for the November 3rd general election. Please remember that, like always, you have a choice this fall, whether to vote in person or by mail. Early in-person voting started yesterday, in fact, at the State of Alaska building on 7th Avenue downtown and at the UAF Wood Center. If you prefer to vote by mail, absentee ballots can be requested online until this Saturday, October 24th. Check out elections.alaska.gov for early voting hours or the absentee ballot application. Now I'd like to introduce you to our moderator today, who has volunteered to lead today's discussion. Bill Bailey is no stranger to the Fairbanks Chamber. He's a past chair and current member of the Chamber's Board of Directors. Professionally, Bill Bailey is the Fairbanks Communications and Community Relations Manager for Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, where he manages emergency communication, internal communication, and philanthropy for the Greater Fairbanks area and the pipeline corridor. He uses his position to build and maintain strong relationships between Alyeska, its contractors, and the residents of Alaska who depend on the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System. Bill previously served as the Director of Public Relations for the Fairbanks North Star Borough School District, directing the district's internal and external communication. He earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, where he studied communications, journalism, and human service, and played for the UAF men's basketball team. He serves as a trustee for the Greater Fairbanks Community Hospital Foundation. He's a past chair, as I said, of this board of directors, and currently serves with us. He's also a member of the Alaska Airlines Advisory Board and a member of the employer support of the Guard and Reserve. He is an award-winning communications professional and recognized by the Alaska Journal of Commerce as one of Alaska's top 40 under 40 some years ago. Bill and his wife Meadow have 2 daughters, Ella and Simone. Welcome, Bill.
Thanks for that introduction. So I want to kick off this forum with a word of thanks, of course, to our candidates who have joined us today. We appreciate your willingness to serve in public office, and we definitely thank you for the work that you will do on behalf of residents and businesses here in the Fairbanks area. So as I introduce you to our audience, will you please wave so the audience knows who each of you are? The candidates running for Alaska House Seat 4 are represented Seat B are Mr. Robert Myers Jr. Mentioned a minute ago, Mr. Evans Eads withdrew from the race on Friday, so obviously he will not be joining us. So again, thanks to the candidates for participating today and welcome to our forum. I want to extend a sincere appreciation and thanks to our political forum series sponsors. That's the Alaska Gas Association, Doyon Limited, Hale & Associates, Hedgecott Group in Real Estate, and Mac Federal Credit Union. We appreciate their ongoing support of these political forums. They've been very informative and we received a lot of great feedback. These organizations, they continue to support informing the voting public and encouraging folks to remain engaged with the important issues that are facing our state. Before we start, we have a few words from one of the sponsors, and that's Doyon Limited. So we will watch a video.
I'm Sharon Hildebrand. I'm with Doyon Limited. 32 years ago in 1988, the late Morris Thompson, CEO of Doyon Limited, recognized the power of the vote. Morris was a leader in his time, and this is where the Get Out the Native Vote initiative was born in the interior. He knew if we all asserted our voting power, we can affect change. That is why Aaron Shutt, Doyon Limited President and CEO, values the Get Out the Native Vote and encourages all to get out and vote. This election year, you are electing representatives in our community as well as on the statewide and national level, our president. If you see something you don't like, you can change it. These leaders impact funding services to our roads, our water and sewer projects, and taxes imposed on our businesses. Take the next step to make your voice heard and vote this election season. Your voice matters, your vote counts. Vote.
So Bill, sorry to interrupt. We can't hear your audio there.
Can you, how about now?
Yes, now you're good.
Okay, sorry about that. So now we're going to do a quick review of our event format. The candidates will each be asked a series of questions that are either short answer or yes or no. Each candidate will have the opportunity to ask one question to his or her opponent and may rebut an opponent's answer once throughout the forum. We have also reserved time at the end for each audience to ask questions. If our online audience has questions throughout the presentation, please type them in the chat box on YouTube. Our chamber staff will review those questions and select a few at the end. We have limited time today, so I encourage the audience to engage with the candidates outside of this forum to learn more about them, certainly their philosophies and their vision for the state of Alaska. So now to the candidates, I have a few last-minute instructions before we begin. As I ask each question, I will give you a time limit. I will also indicate what order you will answer in. We will rotate the order for each question to give everyone a turn to speak first. Candidates for House Seat 4 will always answer back to back, as will candidates for Senate Seat B. That will help the viewers understand their choices for each seat. After each person has finished speaking, I will indicate the next candidate just in case you forget the order. Our official timekeeper, Marissa Sherrill, will start the timer on the screen when you begin speaking. So please stop when your time is up so we can cover all of the questions today. The timer will briefly flash red if you are in the middle of a sentence when the time expires. And if necessary, which I don't think we'll have a problem, we will have to mute your line just to keep the forum moving right along. So we're going to jump into our introductory question. Each candidate will have 30 seconds to answer the introductory question. We will start with House Seat 4 in alphabetical order by last name, Representative Hopkins and then Mr. Kerber. Following them, we will continue with Senate Seat B, Mr. Myers and Assembly Member Sanford. The question is, if you could guarantee one piece of legislation to pass in 2021, what would it be and why? Representative Hopkins, please start us off with your 30-second response.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate that. And thank you to the Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce today for hosting this forum. And Bill, thank you for everything you do for the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System here in Fairbanks, an important piece of infrastructure. The piece of legislation that I would like to see guaranteed to pass in 2021 would be a new formula for the permanent fund dividend. It is currently our biggest budget driver at almost $2 billion for a statutory maximum amount. This is absolutely our biggest budget driver, far and away more than education and healthcare. And our Alaskans need to see its consistency, knowing what is going to be going forward to help our businesses, help our families prepare and plan. This will allow us to move on to the next big parts of our fiscal plan.
Thank you, Representative Hopkins. Sticking with House Seat 4, Mr. Kerber. I think you made the same mistake I made, Mr. Kerber, and you are on mute. Thank you for helping me fill.
You are not alone, Bill. You are not alone. Anyway, hey, my number one piece of legislation would be to implement, negotiate, and pass a state spending cap. In this year ahead, given the fragility of our economy based on COVID, I'm not interested in either taxing our people or making dramatic cuts, which is neither going to press the left or the right. But I think we need to see what our actual costs are associated with COVID. And I think that one of the initiatives of Representative Laban to essentially look at a 1% cut for each department would be a good start.
Thank you, Mr. Kerber. Moving over to Senate Seat B, we will start with Mr. Myers.
All right. Thank you, Bill. I believe the first thing that I'd like to see passed is I would like to see the current formula for the permanent fund dividend put into the Constitution. Not only would it remove it from being the political football that it has been for the last few years here and give us some certainty moving forward, it would also be a heck of a shot in the arm for our economy around the state, for individuals, and for a number of businesses such as tire shops, doctors who perform services past March and get paid in October, and help us keep moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Myers. Staying with Senate Seat B, Assemblymember Sanford, please.
So I actually agree with Representative Hopkins. I remember sitting with my family around our dinner table when we received our first dividend checks in 1980. And I remember how important it was to our finances at that time. And it was nice for families to be able to rely on the dividend during these years. It's become an institution. But that said, the current statutory formula hasn't been followed in 4 years, which means that our current legislators know that it is no longer working for us. And that means we need to take it head on and fix it.
Thank you, Ms. Sanford. Thank you, candidates. We now have a series of questions based on the Fairbanks Chamber's advocacy agenda and the issues that have been suggested by chamber members. We anticipate that our next question may dominate the upcoming legislative session, so you will have 90 seconds to respond with a detailed answer. We will start with House Seat 4 again, Mr. Kerber and Representative Hopkins, then Senate Seat B, Assembly Member Sanford and Mr. Myers. In 2017, Alaska Supreme Court unanimously stated that the legislature's use of permanent fund income is subject to normal appropriation and veto budgetary processes. The question is, how would you prioritize the use of the permanent fund earnings in state budget discussions? Please be specific about what level of PFD you think is appropriate and what state services you would cut to pay for it. Mr. Kerber, you have 90 seconds, please.
Well, great question, Bill. My perspective with respect to the PFD would be to prioritize the use of the PFD to pay down or use as assets to refinance existing debt. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. There's a significant debt load at UAF for their power plant, which was replaced a few years ago. Paying that down either through completely paying it off or refinancing it would immediately give a shot in arm to the budget of UAF. As far as the PFD is concerned, I am for the statutory PFD until such time as it is changed. As a former law enforcement officer in the state of Alaska, I was obligated to enforce the laws that the legislature put into place. And it seems reasonable that lawmakers follow that law as well. And so consequently, at this point in the game, I see that the PFD is going to be a critical part of developing a long-range budget plan. Any long-range budget plan will, of necessity, require addressing the PFD. So whether that statutory PFD changes in formula or not, that is going to be probably one of the big issues facing the legislature in the next year.
Thank you, Mr. Kerber. So staying with House Seat 4, Representative Hopkins, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you, Bill. This is absolutely going to be the discussion that dominates 2021. If not, something horrible at the end of 2020 is going to happen to change that, but when has anything bad in 2020 happened? We must go forward and defend against raids on the permanent fund. The permanent fund, our $60-ish billion trust fund that we have, our sovereign wealth fund, is now the largest part of our state revenue. And that's absolutely critical to get us off of boom and bust budgeting. We as a state can no longer ride the fossil fuel roller coaster when prices of oil go up. We see great spending on new programs and new projects, but then when the price of oil crashes, we have to shelve those projects and cut those programs again. Defending against raids on the permanent fund will maintain that percent of market value draw that allows it to be sustainable so that we can continue to find out what programs are good and move forward with them. These budgets we passed in the last 2 years did that. I was proud of my record to defend against those raids. These budgets also saw hundreds of millions of dollars in painful and serious cuts that we had to take because of our lack of revenue. I do not believe that we should cut the budget simply to provide a larger permanent fund dividend. I believe we should make sure that we can fit it into our priorities, whether it's the university, public safety, or K-12, but I do not believe we should go cut an additional $2 billion from other projects and other programs that help service Alaska just to support one budget item that is currently the largest driver in our entire state budget.
Thank you, Representative Hopkins. We're going to move on over to Senate Seat B, Assemblymember Stanford. You have 90 seconds, please.
So this is the best question because this is a really great place where you can really see the differences between me and my opponent. So I don't have a problem with necessarily putting the permanent fund in the Constitution for the exact reasons I mentioned in the prior question, which is that it's become an institution and it's something that our Alaskan families can rely on. But to say that we should put the current formula into the Constitution this year would mean that we would need to come up with $2 billion in cuts. $2 billion, that's with a B. That's almost half of our budget. We've seen the governor try to cut the budget by less than $1 billion. And we saw and heard from this community that that was absolutely unacceptable. And I would say that if we value any of our institutions, whether they be our healthcare systems, our public safety systems, our education systems, that a $2 billion cut, almost half of a cut to our entire budget, will not work. It's completely unrealistic and shouldn't even be considered in serious conversation. So do I believe in protecting the permanent fund for future generations? Absolutely. And the only way to do that is to figure out a new statutory formula that works for the things that works with the situation that we are now facing.
Thank you, Ms. Stanford. Mr. Myers, please, you have 90 seconds.
All right. Well, Ms. Stanford did bring up the large outcry that we saw over some of the governor's budget cuts last year. There's an even bigger outcry over cutting the permanent fund dividend. All you have to do is go back to the 1999 advisory vote when 83% of the state said to leave the permanent fund dividend alone. The state should be leaving it alone. When's the last time you saw 83% of the state agree with anything? Okay. The problem here is that the state has simply grown too fast, too large, and we need to reduce our spending down to something more sustainable. And we shouldn't be sacrificing the people so that the state can continue its spending. The issue here is that the permanent fund dividend should be preserved, and we still have the rest of the earnings under the 5% formula to use for our state government. And we need to be looking at efficiencies throughout our state. We need to be simply not only looking at a financial side of things, but we need to be looking at the operational side of things. And the fact of the matter is that We designed our operations 30, 40 years ago to use the most expensive method of paying for things in almost every form. And it's time for us to re-examine those operations and find cheaper ways of doing things. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. I see that we have a rebuttal by Ms. Sanford. She has requested a rebuttal opportunity. So you have 30 seconds to state your rebuttal of Mr. Myers' last answer, please.
So to compare what we're experiencing now to something that we voted on over 20 years ago flies in the face of common sense. When 20 years ago, oil was coming in at over $100 a barrel. We had all the money in the world. And of course, that was maybe a great time to talk about what the permanent fund dividend should look like. Since that time though, since 2014, we have cut our state budget drastically. And we've experienced those things in Fairbanks acutely. So I find that that's interesting that you would rely on something from that long ago to make your point.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Sanford. Mr. Myers, you have 30 seconds to respond.
Okay. So in 1999, our oil prices were not over $100 a barrel. They bottomed out at $9 a barrel in the wake of the Asian financial crisis. The problem here is Governor Knowles at the time put it in front of the people, did the smart thing, which our legislature has refused to do recently, and put it in front of the people, and the people said, no, you need to get your spending under control. And that is what the people across the state are telling us now. In all of the opinion polls, over 50%, usually over 60%, are telling us to get our spending under control and to leave the dividend alone.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Ms. Sanford, you have a final 15-second opportunity to conclude your rebuttal if you'd like.
I would. So I'm not relying on polls. For my voters out there, I'm relying on what you have told me in our hundreds of conversations, which is that you want our vital services protected and that you are okay and encouraging me to look at a statutory reform to the permanent fund. So I'm listening to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sanford. Returning back to our questions, and a reminder for the audience, two reminders. The first, each candidate has the opportunity to do one rebuttal throughout the forum. The other reminder is please use the chat box in YouTube to submit any questions that you might have for the candidates. Now we are going to take our first candidate to candidate question. Each candidate will have 30 seconds to ask their opponent a question, and the opponent will have 60 seconds to answer. If desired, the asking candidate may take up to 15 seconds to address the answer, and the opponent may have an additional 30 seconds to clarify. We drew the order randomly before the broadcast, and so we will start with Representative Hopkins. Candidate questions will be interspersed throughout the rest of the program, and they will go in the order of Mr. Myers, then Mr. Kerber, Ms. Sanford. So candidate one, Mr. Representative Hopkins, you have the 30 seconds for the first question, please.
Thank you, Bill. Keith, in July of 2019, I stood on the House floor during a joint session with the Senate to override the governor's vetoes. I read the letter from the Greater Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce that was slipped under my door that morning, asking that we override the governor's vetoes. On September 19th of this year, you said, and I quote, "I want to go to Juneau and support the governor's agenda." Would you have supported the Chamber's letter and the rest of the Interior delegation in Juneau voting on those vetoes, or would you have supported the governor's agenda and upheld those vetoes?
Thank you for your question, Representative Hopkins. Mr. Kerber, you have 60 seconds to answer.
Yes, Representative Hopkins, as I said on September 19th, I don't take it back. I would go down to support the governor's agenda. But I'm also bound not just by the governor's agenda, but also by the interests and issues of my constituents. And when it comes to fiscal management, one of the things that I was actually kind of surprised at when I came across a couple of young people, literally about an hour apart knocking doors, was when it came to, they both asked me about ballot measure 1. I said, well, I'm going to vote no on it. And they said, we agree, because why would we want to give the state more money if they can't manage what they have now? So in this case here, yes, I want to support him, but I'm also going to be bound by the wishes and opinions of my constituents.
Thank you, Mr. Kerber. Mr. Representative Hopkins, you do have the opportunity for a 15-second response if you'd like.
Certainly. I'm not on mute. Thank you, Keith. I appreciate that, and we do certainly need additional revenue for the state. But this question was in 2019 when prices weren't even as bad as they were at that point. We do need to know how you would vote on those important issues where we heard from thousands of Fairbanksans, whether it's at the town hall or House Finance. So I ask you again, how would you have voted on those vetoes?
Thank you, Representative Hopkins. Mr. Kerber, you have 30 seconds to clarify.
Well, Mr. Hopkins, candidly, in September of 2000, or in the year 2019, we were voting on those. I was a little bit more focused on elderly parents. So while I'd love to give you a good answer on that, I can't address that directly.
Thank you, Mr. Kerber. So our next question will again be for all candidates. Senate seat B will start us off this time. So Mr. Myers and Assembly Member Sanford, then House seat 4, Representative Hopkins and Mr. Kerber. You will have 60 seconds to respond. In 2020, the politically polarized atmosphere seems to emphasize defeating one's opponent by any means rather than passing productive legislation. At the Fairbanks Chamber, we are interested in seeing the work of government get done, even if nobody gets everything they want. So the question is, what actions will you take to improve compromise and bipartisanship in our government? Where can you see opportunities for compromise in the upcoming legislative session? We will start with Mr. Myers. You have 60 seconds, please.
Thank you. So there's a tendency on both sides of the aisle, really, where there's problems and solutions that we face. And there's a tendency where if you don't like the solution, people tend to ignore the problem or minimize it. And that's the exact wrong position to take. What we need to be doing is focusing on our problems, regardless of whether or not we like the solution. And if you don't like the solution, find a better solution. Don't ignore the problem. We all go down there with different principles, different values, different visions. And what we need to be doing is taking those principles and values and visions and not compromising on those, but we need to be able to be a little bit unconventional, perhaps. And where I believe I can help out is I'm a little bit new blood. I come from a little bit of a different background compared to most legislators, and I can bring in a more of an unconventional viewpoint compared to most that have been down there recently.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Sticking with Senate seat B, Assembly Member Sanford, you have 60 seconds, please.
Well, I think you're going to have a hard time if you're minimizing your solution of cutting $2 billion from our state budget. So that's got to be an area where you're willing to compromise, Mr. Myers. I'm blessed to work on the Borough Assembly for the last several years, and we're a nonpartisan body. And I've sponsored legislation with almost every single person on that assembly. And we are consensus probably 90% of the time. When you're focused on serving Alaskans and your constituency, those things come easy. When you're focused on representing only one group or in your own echo chamber, that then compromise is hard to find. As an independent running in this race, I'm not beholden to any party or to any party's messages, which is why I think I'm the best person to send it to Juneau in this instance.
Thank you, Ms. Sanford. We have a rebuttal. Mr. Myers, you have requested an opportunity, of course, to rebut her comment. You have 30 seconds to state your rebuttal.
Okay. I'm going to ask that she clarify her stance as an independent. I've gone through Ms. Sanford's political donors, pretty far left on almost all of those. I've gone through her position statements. She's lining up pretty good with just about every Democrat in the state. And there's even a couple of Democrats like Senator Wielechowski that would be to the right of her. I don't see how she's an independent. She looks pretty much like a Democrat to me.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Ms. Sanford, would you like to use 30 seconds to respond?
I would. I'm glad that you spent some time in my APOC, and I'm glad that there were some names that popped out to you. I suppose you didn't look up everybody, though, because I've gotten a lot of support from all political parties. and the largest party being people who find themselves in the middle, call themselves independents, moderates, undeclared nonpartisans. One thing we agree on is that Alaska is overdue for a long-term sustainable fiscal plan, and they trust me regardless of the letter by my name, which is a U, because they know that I can bring that change to Juneau.
Thank you, Ms. Sanford. Mr. Meyer, you have 15 seconds if you'd like to conclude your rebuttal.
Yeah, just real quick. I got to wonder how much trust we can place in certain people. It seems to be the tendency across the state this year for independents for Democrats to try to pass themselves off as independents. And when you get $27,000 from reliable Democratic money, I wonder how independent you are.
So now we will return to the question. We are left looking for responses from House Seat 4. I will repeat the question just in case it's helpful for them. What actions will you take to improve compromise and bipartisanship in our government? Where can you see opportunities for compromise in the upcoming legislative session? So starting with House Seat 4, Representative Hopkins.
Thank you, Bill. I went down to Juneau with the approach that we should look at problems and how we solve them with, it's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't worry about who gets the credit. And we saw resounding success from that approach, whether it was working across the aisle with the Senate and Senator John Coghill to pass landmark energy legislation, or it was working with Senator Click Bishop to pass a piece of legislation that lowered the cost of construction for new businesses and homes and retrofits and remodels. And that was at the urging of a Republican here in Fairbanks, our borough mayor, Bryce Ward. And of course, I was part of a bipartisan or tripartisan coalition with independents, Republicans, and Democrats that passed responsible budgets and made sure we played defense to protect the Fairbanks and Alaska's economy. I can promise that if I'm elected again for this coming session, I will go down to Juneau and I will always put Fairbanks and Alaska first over any party label.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Mr. Kerber, you have 60 seconds, please.
Well, Bill, that's a great question. And I have a experience in the military dealing with foreign cultures, I mean, extreme foreign cultures to include during wartime, sitting down with people and trying to create agreement, even though I knew the possibility existed that those individuals were planning lethal operations against me. In the ministry, I've sat down with disparate groups who would not be considered friendly to Christianity or to ministry in general. And what I learned from those things is you can learn a lot just by listening to other people. So if I can manage what I've done in wartime or even in the ministry, I think I can sit down with Democrats, independents, nonpartisans, undeclared, whatever category people identify themselves in politically, and listen to what they say. My wife and I got back from a vacation recently, and we both had gained a little weight. We both agreed that we needed to lose a little weight. I think we can all come together and agree that we need a spending cap to work on preventing the kind of perturbations in our budget that we have seen over time. So that's one where I think we could get some agreement, or at least I'm hopeful.
Thank you, Mr. Kerber, and thank you all candidates. So you have 60 seconds to answer the next question. We will start with Senate Seat B, Assemblymember Stanford, and then Mr. Myers, followed by House Seat 4, Mr. Kerber, and Representative Hopkins. After the dramatic economic fall in early 2020, some industries have come soaring back, like home improvement stores and Amazon.com, while others have experienced a continual downturn, like restaurants and tourism. Though many have innovated and adapted to stay open and keep their employees on payrolls, companies can survive only for so long with reduced revenues. So the question is, do you support additional federal or state aid to businesses? If so, what is the legislature's role in ensuring that any future aid is distributed efficiently and has meaningful impact on our economy? How will you target support to those businesses, workers, and communities that, due to factors outside of their control, find themselves on a downward or flat trajectory? Assemblymember Stanford, we will start with you, and you have 30 seconds, please.
So I absolutely believe that we should be advocating for more federal aid and talking to our congressional delegation about how to make that happen and how we can best serve their mission, which is to get that moving through Congress. you know, I think this is really part and parcel to the bigger budget discussion that we're facing. And again, I would point out that under my opponent's plan to cut $2 billion, we're going to be missing programs such as the money that we send out to enhance our fisheries and enhance those types of opportunities, the money that we put out into our Alaska tourism industry and the Tourism Association that markets Alaska to bring people back into the state. And those are things that will all be on the chopping block under my opponent's agenda. And so I would just say that, of course, we need to get as much federal dollars as we can. We need to get them out quickly, but we need to make sure that some of the programs that we have within the state that enhance small business are protected.
Thank you, Ms. Sanford. So sticking with Senate B, Mr. Myers, you have 60 seconds to respond.
Oops.
There you go.
Same song, second verse here. So what we saw coming from the CARES Act and the other federal stimulus packages over the last 6-7 months here, a lot of it seemed to be kind of a shotgun approach. There wasn't a whole lot of thought behind it. It was, let's get as much money out as fast as we can and not necessarily worry about effectiveness. As we've been going through this crisis, what we have noticed is that certain types of businesses are more susceptible to risk than others. So for example, if we do get more federal funding going forward, what we need to be doing is we need to be targeting that much better. So for example, the tourism industry, especially hard hit this year in Alaska, especially since they effectively lost an entire summer. We need to be looking at the size of businesses. Larger businesses can weather this storm a lot better than smaller ones. And so we need to be targeting that aid a lot more closely than we did the first time around.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Now moving over to House Seat 4, Mr. Kerber, you have 60 seconds to answer the question, please.
Great, thank you. So part of the question was, do I look forward to additional federal or state funds for this effort? One, at the federal level, I'm undecided because at this point in the game, it's looking like we're going to be spending more than our GDP for the first time since World War II if we continue those potentially multi-trillion-dollar efforts at the state level. I'm also still undecided. However, I would say that there is a specific tax that's currently in place called the vehicle rental tax that is ideally targeted to aid tourism promotion. I think that's one that special attention should be given to ensuring that that does get to the tourism industry. A couple of issues I want to say is that I think that the city of Fairbanks has been a model in the getting out dispensing of their CARES funds. They did a great job in that. And I also think that the legislature did a good job in getting those funds appropriated quickly. And I believe a one-day special session. So that was a good job. That showed care for the people on the ground. So in this sense, I think localities are best suited for this function. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kerber. Representative Hopkins, you have 60 seconds to respond, please.
Thank you. I agree, Keith. Thank you for that. We certainly did try to get that money on the ground and moving quickly. Getting it to the borough, whose procurement process has slowed that down, and to the city, where they have done a good job of getting that money out quickly. One place that we did miss that we will need to look into is how do we make sure that our local hospital doesn't fall into the same donut hole that it had before, where our hospital was too big for rural money, but too small for urban funds. And it's made itself whole through some support that's been able to find, but that's something we have to make sure. And as for supporting federal and state aid, yes, absolutely. Just because our businesses received funding and support back in July or August doesn't mean they've been able to stay on their feet, whether it's going to be January, February, March when that support comes through. So we need to make sure that we're able to compromise when we go to Juneau and get that money passed through quickly. It will be a different process than we saw earlier because we don't have the Legislative Budget and Audit Committee to be able to do that with us. So we're going to have to compromise and work quickly to make sure those funds go through to support small businesses.
Thank you. So now we are going to have our next candidate-to-candidate question. In fact, we'll do two back-to-back. So first, we'll have Mr. Myers. You have 30 seconds to ask your question of your opponent. So please, 30 seconds to ask your question.
Real simple question. Who will you be voting for our U.S. Senator?
Ms. Stanford, you have 60 seconds to answer the question, please.
So the only reason I can think of that you would ask me that is because while you claim to want compromise and you claim to want to work across the aisle, that really all you're trying to do is out me as somebody who's not an independent. And I would caution you, because I think that people who I've been speaking with really want somebody who's willing to work no matter what the letter is by their name. That has been overwhelmingly the message that I am getting from our constituents, the people who live in our neighborhoods. So I plan to vote for Al Gross in the, wait, did you say Senate? Yeah, in the Senate race for a number of different reasons. But I'm one vote, and I would encourage everybody to exercise their right to cast their vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sanford. Mr. Myers, you have 15 seconds for a response if you'd like.
All right. Well, I appreciate your honesty. Seems interesting to me that you would be voting for the man who has aligned himself with Chuck Schumer instead of aligning yourself with one of the guys who is known as one of the most bipartisan senators in the country.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Ms. Sanford, would you like to respond, please? You have 30 seconds, if so.
So Senator Sullivan doesn't have that title, but nice try. Again, Rob, I really see you right now as being a bit of a mouthpiece for the Republican Party. And I don't know if you've gotten out of your district much, but Senate District B is comprised of House District 3 and House District 4. It's a very complicated district with a really diverse set of constituents. And I would just echo again that they're looking for somebody who's going to represent all of our interests in Juneau. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sanford. Our next candidate question will start with Mr. Kerber. You have 30 seconds to ask your opponent a question, followed by an opportunity of 60 seconds for Representative Hopkins to respond. So Mr. Kerber, please, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Bill. Representative Hopkins, at our forum at the League of Women Voters last week, listening to your responses in conjunction with some of your fellow Democrats or nonpartisan individuals, it seemed that there was a suggestion or an inference that your combined strategy moving forward to solve our fiscal problems has three parts to it. Number one is that there will be no state cuts. Number two, the permanent fund will be used exclusively or largely exclusively for government services, and that there will be additional taxes. Am I wrong in my assessment?
Thank you. Representative Hopkins, you have 60 seconds to answer.
Thank you. Thank you, Keith. The most important thing we can do for our long-term fiscal plan is to get us off of boom and bust budgeting. And I've said that over and over, but we have to be able to put in place a structure that's going to allow our economy to grow and plan ahead. That involves a spending cap. That is something I strongly support. That involves finding new revenue that's not solely reliant on one industry to pay all of our bills. And it involves protecting against raids on the permanent fund. So, right now we get a majority of our budget from a percent of market value on the permanent fund itself, the $60 billion, and that goes into the general fund, where the dividend also comes out of. I support a dividend that is responsible going forward, one that can be protected for future generations, not a $3,000 dividend now that's going to bottom out our earnings reserve and not allow that to go into the future. So we need responsible budgeting, getting us off of boom and bust budgeting, a spending cap, and new revenue. So those are the things that I would be looking for. So I guess the answer is a yes to what you said, and there's a more structured approach to it.
Mr. Kerber, do you have a 15-second response?
Okay, well, I'm already grateful that we've increased and built on the comity of the League of Women Voters, and that we can agree on a spending cap. I think that's the first step in getting our fiscal house under control. With respect to the other issues, thank you for clarifying that indeed was the perspective that you guys were putting forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kerber. Representative Hopkins, do you have anything you'd like to clarify for 30 seconds?
No, sir. Thank you, Bill.
Fabulous candidates. So we will now move into a rapid fire round of yes/no questions. You should have your red and green cards in front of you. For our colorblind friends, the green card has a check mark to indicate yes, and the red card has an X to indicate no. For each question, please hold up the card that corresponds with your answer and keep it up until all candidates have responded. So first, we're going to start with a warm-up question. Have you voted in all of the 3 previous state elections? Thank you, candidates. So now we're going to go ahead and roll right into our rapid fire questions. When you know you are entering a business where you will need to stand within 6 feet of other Fairbanks area residents, do you wear a face mask? Okay. Ballot measure 1 on the November 3 general election ballot would increase the state tax rate on oil production and discourage future investment by oil companies in Alaska. Would you encourage someone listening today to vote for this initiative? Thank you. Do you support increasing the state's outdated motor fuel tax to fund our state's infrastructure needs? Would you support implementing a broad-based tax, such as a state income or sales tax, to pay for state services if current revenue does not cover existing programs? Thank you. Now, I will read off a list of projects at varying stages of consideration for Alaska. Use your yes/no cards to indicate if you support each one. A road from the Ambler Mining District to the Dalton Highway. The Alaska to Alberta Railroad, or A2A, connecting Canada to our existing rail system. A deep water port in Nome. The Susitna River Dam. A natural gas pipeline from the North Slope to South Central Alaska. Great, thank you. So we have 2 more prepared questions for all candidates and 1 more candidate-to-candidate question. Audience, again, this is a final reminder. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please take a minute, submit it to the YouTube chat box, and those questions will be presented here at the end. So candidates, you will have 60 seconds to answer the next question. We will start with House Seat 4, Representative Hopkins and Mr. Kerber, followed by Senate Seat B, Mr. Myers, and then Assembly Member Stanford. The Fairbanks Chamber is composed of member organizations who rely heavily on the University of Alaska Fairbanks to educate and train qualified employees. In addition, the university is a major economic driver in our region. So the question is, what is your vision for the future of the University of Alaska system? How will your budget priorities impact its future? Representative Hopkins, we will start with you, and you have 60 seconds, please.
Thanks, Bill. And as a UAL alumni yourself, thank you for that. I have hired a lot of UAF alumni. I'm married to a UAF alumni. I grew up going to UAF for camps and basketball, whether it's basketball or Suzuki. You know, the UAF campus is incredibly important to our community, not just as an economic driver, but also as a driver of thought and culture that brings incredible shows and opportunities here to Fairbanks. And if we cut it further than what we see now, that is going to go away. Fairbanks was recently nominated as a top 10 small university town. UAF just the other day was listed as a top 50 return for your investment campus in this nation. So it's an incredible important part. I believe we need to not go past the pact of cuts that the governor and the Board of Regents agreed to. And because it's so important, I will support the Fairbanks Chamber and their legislative advocacy for the university and continue to defend it against further cuts.
Thank you, Representative Hopkins. So staying with House Seat 4, Mr. Kerber, please, you have 60 seconds.
When it comes to the UA system, I can say that it'll always be special to me because I met my wife there as she was teaching a Bible study in 1982, and our two oldest kids who live in Fairbanks are both UA system grads, one with a bachelor's and master's, one with a bachelor's and half a master's. As a believer in higher education, having used my 911 GI Bill to earn a master's and a doctorate, we want to keep UAF, the flagship campus of the UA system, strong. So one way to answer the question of how do we brace it against the vicissitudes of cuts is, number one, we support them getting the fullness of the land grant, which they are to receive, and which actually Congressman Young has just recently made progress on. The other thing they're going to have to take into account is the declining demographics of college-age students. So some of the things that were done early in this century by past President Mark Hamilton, like the scholarships for Alaskans to go to UAA system schools, we need to keep in place. So that's what I think about maintaining UA as a great Arctic institution of higher learning.
We will now move over to Senate Seat B, asking Mr. Myers to provide a response in 60 seconds. Mr. Myers.
Okay. So I'd like to echo a little bit of what Colonel Kerber has said and what Representative Hopkins has said. Colonel Kerber is completely correct that we need to be making sure that they get their full land grant. Going back to what Representative Hopkins has said about our budgeting in general, getting it off that boom and bust cycle. Well, the thing is that when we tie the university's funding to the state, then they're going to be on a boom and bust cycle. That's part and parcel of it. So the best course for the university moving forward is to both consolidate and diversify. They need to consolidate some of their programs and their administration, and they need to diversify some of their revenue. Most universities throughout this country don't depend simply on a state funding. They also have their own foundation, and the university has been very lax in growing its foundation, and they also depend heavily on alumni giving, and our university has been horrible at getting its alumni giving together. So they need to be changing how they do business.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. So staying with Senate Seat B, Assemblymember Sanford, you have 60 seconds to respond, please.
So I grew up on the university campus. My mom went to the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and I think that it is so much more to Fairbanks than just an institution of higher learning. I would strongly agree with Representative Hopkins that it's a meeting place, a gathering place. It also is a place where so many of our rural communities can come and get the types of experiences that keep them in the state, allow them to be teachers in the state, engineers in the state, all the kinds of things that we want, nurses in the state, the kinds of things that we want for our businesses to remain strong. I do not support further cuts on the university. Do I think that there are some efficiencies that could be gained? Absolutely. But I do think that we would cut off our nose to spite our face if we would in any way advocate that there should be less money going to our campuses.
Thank you, Ms. Sanford, and thank you all candidates for that. Our final candidate question will be asked by Assemblywoman Sanford. So we will stick with you. You have 30 seconds to ask your question of your opponent. And Mr. Myers, you will have an opportunity to answer in 60 seconds. So Ms. Sanford.
Yes, so I'm glad that you called me out for all of my policy positions sounding like a Democrat, because Rob, I got your mailer the other day, and on it you say that you support a world-class university and excellent and affordable health care. And yet you say time and again that you are for cutting those drastically. So my question is, how do you want to achieve excellence through drastic cuts? Or in the alternative, are you just saying this to get votes?
Thank you, Ms. Sanford. Mr. Myers, you have 60 seconds to answer.
Well, thank you for the question. I think it does highlight a big difference between our philosophies. Your philosophy seems to be that the only way that really anything happens is if government is involved or even leading the charge. And I believe that it's entirely possible for us to have a thriving private sector without the government being the main player in our economy or anywhere else for that matter. So for example, I believe that a number of the programs at our university already are world-class and need to stay that way. And as we just mentioned with the last question, the best way that we can do that is to have our university help diversify its revenue so it's no longer dependent on simply one income source coming from our state. As far as healthcare goes, again, the issue is not that the only way to have affordable healthcare is to have it coming from our government. As we noted with the Affordable Care Act, it created healthcare that was anything but, where healthcare costs in most cases tripled. What it's time for us to do is time for us to return to the private sector and see what solutions can be found there.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Ms. Stanford, would you like to offer a 15-second response?
Yes, thank you. We do disagree on what the fundamental premises of government entails. And I think that the things that you're promising in this mailer fall very flat without the explanation that those involve 1/3 cuts to their budgets.
Thank you, Ms. Stanford. Mr. Myers, you have 30 seconds if you'd like to clarify.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Our state is running out of money, and this is not the 1980s anymore, and our budget is going to have to reflect that. If it doesn't, then we're simply ignoring reality, and we're going to have to cut our budget down and, again, find new ways of doing things. There are 49 other states in this country that somehow managed to do almost everything that we managed to do here at a lot lower cost in most cases. And so we need to be hunting around to different solutions that have been found throughout this country to come up with cheaper ways of doing things.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. So that concludes our candidate to candidate questions. We're now going to move into our next question. Each candidate, you will have 45 seconds to respond to the final prepared question. We will start with House Seat 4, Mr. Kerber, then Representative Hopkins, followed by Senate Seat B, Assemblymember Sanford, and then Mr. Myers. The events of 2020 have reinforced the vital services that K-12 schools provide to our community. Having students at school is best for kids, it's best for working parents, and it's best for the local economy. Teachers have professional expertise in educational methods, and they are best suited to educate future citizens and train the future workforce. Schools also provide an important service to the economy by providing a safe and productive environment for children. Childcare was a challenge for working Alaskans before COVID-19. With most students in Fairbanks still learning from home full-time, the need has only increased, and businesses are struggling to accommodate parents juggling childcare and professional responsibilities. Bringing students, teachers, and staff back into school buildings safely is a huge task, and there are costs to rearrange classrooms, provide the necessary cleaning supplies, and manage the changes going forward. Our question of each of you is, what level of support should the state of Alaska provide to public schools for these unforeseen costs, and how does this fit into your budget priorities? We will start with Mr. Kerber, and sir, you have 45 seconds.
Thanks, Bill. This year's going to, I believe, provide us some data moving forward concerning our K-12 schools, namely, especially whether this trend towards a move to homeschooling is just short-term as a result of the schools being closed, or whether it's more long-term thing. Because we're not sure yet whether it is a long-term or just a short-term thing, I believe we need to see if schools actually reopen before we decide or determine public policy concerning additional, same, or less funding. One of the things that I took great pleasure in as I was knocking the nearly 1,300 doors in my district that I was able to get done between August and October was bumping into teachers who were actually, some of them teaching and just taking a pause. And the thing that we have to note is this, is that the teachers are doing a great job in tough circumstances. They should be commended for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kerber. Staying with House Seat 4, Representative Hopkins, please, you have 45 seconds.
Thank you. You know, it's one of my great honors to be able to work in my day job when I'm not legislating for Alaska's educators. I get to hear from them about their concerns everywhere from Point Hope and Barrow down to Cantwell and Fairbanks educators as well. But, you know, we need to listen to the experts, the medical experts, when it comes to how we open our schools. We shouldn't be listening to any politician, school board or Fairbanks or Juneau. We need to listen to the doctors. We don't have that answer, and we shouldn't be pretending that we do. We need to also look at holding our school district funding formulas harmless across the state. Fairbanks has lost almost 10% of their students, and Anchorage over 5,000 students, but others have seen huge increases in their correspondence schools. We have to make sure we can hold them harmless and use last year's student count numbers to allow them to continue to balance their budget.
Thank you, Representative Hopkins. We're going to move on over to Senate Seat B, starting with Assemblymember Stanford. Please, you have 45 seconds.
So I do think that this is going to provide a great opportunity to get data. I don't think that our homeschool numbers will remain the way that they are, because most people that I've talked to are anxiously awaiting for the doctors to say it's safe to send their children back to school. There is going to be a cost overage next year. And honestly, I'm not going to lie, we don't have room in our budget for it. But one thing you can count on with me in office is that I will not sacrifice education for something that is less important, because education should be the answer to all of our problems. It's shown to make us all better people and save money in the long run. So I will find room for education in my budget priorities always.
Thank you, Ms. Stanford. Mr. Myers, please, you have 45 seconds.
Well, I believe Colonel Kerber there made a good point that at this point, it's very hard to tell exactly how much money it's going to take to safely reopen our schools. There are a lot of people that want our schools to reopen as soon as possible here. And I think what we're going to need to do is, as the negotiations continue to go on with Congress over the next stimulus package, whatever's coming out there, that we take a little bit of that money and reserve it for additional cleaning supplies, additional personnel, whatever other supplies that we need to supply our schools with in order to get them to reopen safely and to reopen with the confidence of the public.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Myers. Now we will take a few audience questions. So candidates, you have, I think we're going to say you guys each have 30 seconds at this point to respond to our audience questions. Our order will be Senate Seat B, Mr. Myers, Ms. Sanford, and then House Seat 4, Representative Hopkins and Mr. Kerber. See, our first audience question is, where do you stand on ballot measure 2 on the general election ballot, an act replacing the political party primary with an open primary system and ranked choice general election, and requiring additional campaign finance disclosures? We will start with Mr. Myers. Please, you have 30 seconds.
So what we see with the ranked choice voting and the jungle primary system that is being created in ballot measure 2, it creates a whole lot of extra rules around our elections. And as a general rule, when you create a whole extra set of rules, you tend to empower the political insiders, not the average citizen. And I believe the average citizen will get lost in the process and will have trouble following it and making their voice heard. We have a simple system now. It doesn't need to be fixed. And we need to just vote no on 2.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Staying with Senate Seat B, Ms. Stanford, please, you have 30 seconds to respond.
As a lifelong independent, I am voting yes on ballot measure 2. There are certainly parts of this ballot measure that I don't completely love and that I think are going to be problematic, or at least more work, certainly for nonprofits and folks who engage in political activity. That said, ranked choice voting it works, and it's been shown to work. We use it at my current work at Tanana Chiefs Conference to elect our chief chairman. And everybody feels at the end, when we elect him by plurality, that they have won and that the true leader is sitting at the helm.
Thank you, Ms. Stanford. We are now going to go over to House Seat 4. Representative Hopkins, you have 30 seconds to respond.
Thank you. You know, I genuinely have not made up my mind on this, but there are some excellent parts of this ballot measure, whether it's the financial disclosures that the public should know where money is coming from and how it's being spent. I think that's absolutely critical. I also think the closed primaries are a huge boon and support of the party system and those backroom deals. So this actually, in my book, removes that opportunity for parties to hold, where 7% of people in a district can boot somebody out, like just happened to Senator Coghill. I believe this is a great opportunity to allow more Alaskans a voice.
Staying with House Seat 4, Mr. Kerber, you have 30 seconds to answer the question, please.
Well, I'm strongly voting no on ballot measure 2 because at its core, I believe it's a direct assault on the notion of one person, one vote. Almost 30% of votes in a ranked choice voting scheme end up becoming exhausted or not counting. And that alone is enough to dissuade me from supporting this effort. So I'm a strong no on ballot measure 2.
Thank you, Mr. Kerber. We will go to our next audience question. You will have 45 seconds to respond. The state of Alaska has been operating on a minimal capital budget for years. It generally fails to cover the rehabilitation and development needs of our roads, bridges, and state buildings. These factors shackle the state's ability to move needed capital projects forward, which impacts business and community development. At what level do you feel the capital budget should be funded to address the infrastructure needs of Alaska? And how would you improve the process? We will start with Ms. Sanford. And again, you have 45 seconds to answer the question.
Yes, thank you. One of my proudest achievements on the Borough Assembly is working with Assemblymember Legislature on making sure that we have a robust facilities maintenance reserve. Now, that would be a designated fund within the state, so it wouldn't be allowed, but I love the idea that we have a certain amount each year that no matter what happens, we have it set aside for facilities maintenance. And that is definitely something that I would love to get to where we can talk about. The only way we get to talk about that, though, is if we develop a long-term sustainable fiscal plan. That's it. We have to have this discussion. And that means putting everything on the table. That means making sure that we've got open discussions with our industry, making open discussion with our fishermen, open discussion with Alaskans about how we have a good state, a safe state, and a good economy.
Thank you, Ms. Sanford. Staying with Senate Seat B, Mr. Myers, you have 45 seconds to answer the question, please.
So yeah, we, of course, in a tight budget situation, the capital budget does tend to get cut first, just because it's the easiest one to cut. And so that's what we've seen for the last about 4, 5, 6 years now. And that's one of the best reasons that I can think of to be serious about cutting down our operating budget to a more sustainable level, is so that more years we have some money available in order to send to that capital budget that then helps build the infrastructure that our state depends on in order to grow our economy over the long term, rather than the short-term growth that tends to come from the operating budget. So that's the best thing that I can see us doing moving forward, is getting our operating budget under control to make room for that capital budget.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Moving over to House Seat 4, Mr. Kerber, you have 45 seconds to answer the question, please.
I think the answers of the prior two people speak to the same issues. Number one, we do need a long-term state budget plan. Economists have suggested that had we had a spending cap with teeth in it, we might not have a permanent fund of $60 billion at this point. We might have it closer to north of $100 billion. So clearly we need that, because without that, and without a long-term spending plan, the annual reduction or elimination of a capital budget is almost guaranteed. So without a doubt, that issue is the driving issue in the next legislative session, and that is getting a long-term state spending plan.
Thank you, Mr. Kerber. Staying with House Seat 4, Representative Hopkins, please, 45 seconds to respond.
Thank you. I guess we're 4 for 4, needing a long-term spending plan. Of course, the devil is going to be in the details. One of the important parts about our capital budget is transportation funding. And you can see that in work all across town and across the state, because that transportation funding comes in at a 90-10 match from the feds. That means 90% of the project's cost is federally funded and 10% is state funded. And that's where we've seen the capital budget allocations go. We absolutely need to find ways to grow it. And that's going to be helped by looking at and readdressing our motor fuels tax. It has not been readdressed since JFK was president in the 1960s. And, you know, we have a lot more lane miles and a lot more cars now to have to worry about upkeep. And that's a great start to support those projects and those jobs.
We are now going to move to our third audience question. You will have 30 seconds to respond, and we will go in the order of Representative Hopkins, Mr. Kerber, Mr. Myers, and Assemblymember Sanford. Our third question is, on a personal level, how do you contribute to improving your community? Again, you have 30 seconds, and we will start with Representative Hopkins.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. So whoever brought that up from the audience, I really appreciate it. You know, over the last 2 years as a legislator, it's been listening to the community. It's not going down and assuming that I have all the answers, but it's listening to what all of you have been telling me in the biggest job that I have. Yeah, and that's representing District 4. You know, we held town halls where 1,000 people showed up telling us to overturn the governor's budget, where we had 9 hours of public testimony when the House Finance came to Fairbanks, telling us to overturn those vetoes. And listening to you in order to find out how to do this job is what I've made as my priority.
Mr. Kerber, you have 30 seconds to answer the question.
That's a great question. For me personally, this leads back to my previous job as a pastor. Our church was a consistent monthly supporter of organizations like the Fairbanks Rescue Mission, the Food Bank, Love in the Name of Christ, and not just as an organization, but my wife and I personally have supported those organizations, which give back to the community and interestingly requires zero government involvement. And I think that some of those organizations do get some grant monies, but the primary source comes from people like us, regular members of the city of Fairbanks, the borough of Fairbanks, who want to help other Fairbanks.
Thank you. We will move over to Senate Seat B, starting with Mr. Myers. You have 30 seconds to answer the question, please.
So in addition to working roughly 70 hours a week and raising my 3 kids, I do whatever I can to throw myself into helping my community individually. We go through a program through our church that helps out homeless families, where we house and feed homeless families for a week at a time. And myself, and especially my wife, is heavily involved in that program. Otherwise, it's whatever I can find. For example, last week on Facebook, a gentleman posted that he needed a jump or a lift. And I was over there in 15 minutes with a set of jumper cables to get his car moving so he could get to work.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Staying with Senate Seat B, Assemblymember Sanford. 30 seconds to answer the question, please.
Thank you. For as long as I've been in Alaska, I have tried to give back to my community, whether that be through coaching youth sports or being active in the Alaska Youth Court or serving on numerous boards or commissions. I've always wanted to be active in making Fairbanks a better place and making Alaska a better place. So one of the things I love about Fairbanks, though, is that despite all of our political ideologies, we support one another, whether that be through donating to our sports teams or giving each other a jump on the side of the road. And I love that about Fairbanks, and I love that particularly.
Thank you, Sanford, for answering the question. That concludes our audience questions. We appreciate the audience for participating today by submitting your questions via chat. We are now going to move into closing statements. So this is the part of the program where we give each candidate 60 seconds to give closing remarks. We'll start with House Seat 4, Mr. Kerber and Representative Hopkins, then conclude with Senate Seat B, Assemblymember Sanford and Mr. Myers. So starting first, Mr. Kerber, you have 60 seconds, please.
Well, I've enjoyed this forum quite a bit. And over my left shoulder, your right, as you're seeing it, is a picture. You can't see the people in the picture, but they are my dad, my stepmom, and my in-laws. All of them have graduated and stepped into eternity. Our dads last year, less than 60 days apart. On this phone I have right here is a voicemail message from my grandson, one of my grandsons, Finn, and where he prayed for me before the forum last week. I feel sandwiched between the generation that has gone behind and gone and the one that's coming ahead. And I believe that if America was worth fighting for overseas, it's worth fighting for here. It's been a great privilege being part of this campaign and experiencing the opportunity to talk to fellow Fairbanksans in House District 4 and see the great wisdom that's out there. One of the things I do believe is this: if we stick together and come together, we've already overcome the '64 earthquake, the 2018 earthquake, and we're going to survive the earthquake of 2020 being COVID. We can do this together. Thank you, Mr.
Kerber. Staying with House Seat 4, Representative Hopkins, you have 60 seconds for your conclusion, your closing statements, please.
Thanks, Bill. Thank you, Bill. Thanks to Keith for coming today and all the work over the last months on this well-run campaign for both of us. You know, I'm not just sandwiched in the next generation, but I want to thank my wife and my family for all of their support as well, and my wife for our first child who's on her way. So I'm going to have a baby here in May, and thanks, Keith, and I'm pretty excited. But that means I have to be looking out for the future of our state. And that means we have to have an economy that's going to be sound and supportable and sustainable and predictable. We have to be able to plan ahead with our economy. and making sure we have a long-term fiscal plan that does not raid the permanent fund, does not cut all of the budget just to fulfill a full dividend, which, let me be clear, would have resulted in a loss of 15,000 jobs, according to the Institute of Social and Economic Research, in exchange for 9,000 temporary jobs for a full dividend. My priority will always be on the economy going forward, and that's why I'm proud to be running.
Thank you, Representative Hopkins. Moving over to Senate CB, Assembly Member Sanford, please, your closing statements in 60 seconds.
Yes, thank you so much to the Chamber for having this forum and this a chance to be engaged with one another. I think that this is vital to the process because I think it's really important that voters know what they're getting when they go to the polls. And in this instance, what you're getting is a lifelong independent Alaskan that has the experience and the education to go to Juneau and hit the ground running. I am running on developing a long-term sustainable fiscal plan that doesn't involve cutting our vital services to the bone. Now, I've been out there, I've been talking to you guys, and I know that we don't agree on everything. And I'm asking for your support, not because we agree on everything, but because we can disagree and you still believe in my ability to advocate for Alaska that makes sense for everyone. I love Alaska and I'm proud to be Alaskan. And I'd ask for your vote on November 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sanford. Mr. Myers, please, your closing statements in 60 seconds.
So a lot of what we're seeing in this election, not just here, but around the state, revolves around one simple question. Who's in charge here? Is this, moving forward, is this going to be a state where our state government takes primacy and the rest of the state, it takes the back seat? Or is this going to be a state where the private sector moves forward, takes primacy, builds our state, and the state government provides the backup and certain vital services that are required in order for that to happen? Our state government doesn't exist to be a jobs program. Our state government exists to provide certain services for our state and our citizens to move forward. And what I'm concerned about with my 3 kids at home is I know I can get them educated in this state. After they're done with that, will there be jobs for them available, or will I be sending university educated graduates down somewhere in the rest of this country in order to be able to build their families, buy their houses, and build their careers? And that's what I'm running for.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. And really, thank you again to all of our candidates today. For this political forum, we had Representative Greer Hopkins and Mr. Keith Kerber from House Seat 4. And for Senate CB, we had Mr. Robert Myers Jr. and Fairbanks North Star Borough Assemblymember Marna Sanford. I apologize for flubbing your introduction earlier, Marna. Here at the Chamber, we appreciate the flexibility and the willingness of all of our candidates to try this new online format with us. I laud our current chair, Sabrina Binkley, and our Chamber President, Marissa Shera, for of course, her and her staff's work this year. It's been a challenging year for all of us. And so we appreciate you guys being flexible and working with us here. We certainly want to thank our audience again for doing their best to stay informed and to become really informed voters. And we hope that they follow up with this and share the link, and so that folks can rewatch this political forum at a later date. We have one more final political forum coming up before Election Day, so that's next Tuesday, October 27, where we will hear from the candidates for U.S. House and Senate. So please join us at noon on the 27th for that discussion. And as I just mentioned a minute ago, if you missed any of our previous events, all those recordings can be found on the Chamber of Commerce website. So that's fairbankschamber.org. You can just click on the political banner, that graphic, and it will take you to all of those forums. So with that concludes today's political forum. Again, thank you very much to all of the candidates. We appreciate your participation today.